The crowd fell silent as flames licked the pages of the holy book, orange light dancing across horrified faces in the evening twilight. Children pressed closer to their mothers while elderly women clutched their rosaries, watching in disbelief as someone would dare desecrate Scripture during their most sacred procession. The man holding the burning Bible stood defiantly in the middle of Main Street, his weathered face twisted with anger as ash floated down like gray snow onto the cobblestones. Behind him, the ornate statue of the Virgin Mary continued its slow journey through town, carried by 8 men whose steps had faltered when the flames first appeared. Father Miguel pushed through the stunned congregation, his white collar gleaming in the firelight. The entire community had gathered for this annual celebration, 3 generations walking together behind their beloved statue, and now this stranger was turning their holy day into a nightmare. Marcus Chun adjusted his grip on the book, letting more pages catch fire as he stared down the approaching priest. He had driven 3 hours to reach this small Catholic town, carrying with him years of resentment against organized religion and a determination to expose what he saw as dangerous superstition. The shocked gasps and angry murmurs from the crowd only fueled his conviction that these people needed to wake up from their delusions. Marcus raised the burning book higher, preparing to drop it onto the street when the Virgin Mary statue began to weep. Clear tears streamed down the carved wooden face, glistening in the firelight as gasps echoed through the crowd. The evening air had been perfectly still moments before, but now a powerful wind swept down Main Street from nowhere, extinguishing the flames in Marcus's hands instantly. The Bible fell to the ground, its pages blackened but no longer burning, while the wind continued to swirl around the statue with impossible precision. Mrs. Rodriguez pointed with trembling fingers as the tears on Mary's face caught the streetlights, each drop visible to the hundreds of witnesses packed along both sides of the street. Her granddaughter tugged at her sleeve, whispering that the lady in the statue was moving, that her eyes seemed to be looking directly at the man with the book. Marcus staggered backward, staring at his hands where the flames had vanished without burning him. The wind died as suddenly as it had come, leaving the night air calm again, but the statue continued weeping as the 8 carriers slowly lowered it to the ground. Father Miguel crossed himself while chaos erupted around him. Cell phones emerged from pockets as people began recording, their voices mixing together in Spanish and English, all trying to capture what they had witnessed. Marcus stood frozen in the center of it all, unable to explain what had just happened to his carefully planned protest. Marcus backed away from the crowd, shaking his head as people pressed closer with their phones still recording. There had to be a logical explanation for what just happened. Wind patterns, some kind of trick with the statue, maybe even mass hysteria affecting an entire community desperate to see miracles. The local news van pulled up within minutes, its bright lights cutting through the evening darkness as reporter Sarah Martinez jumped out with her camera crew. She had received 3 different calls about supernatural events on Main Street, each caller insisting they had witnessed the impossible. Father Miguel knelt beside the weeping statue, his own tears mixing with those streaming down the carved face. The 8 men who had been carrying Mary refused to move her, convinced that something sacred was happening that demanded their reverence and protection. Marcus fumbled for his car keys, desperate to escape the growing crowd and the questions he could not answer. His sister would be calling soon to check on their mother's surgery scheduled for tomorrow morning, and he needed to be thinking about family instead of whatever mass delusion had just occurred. But as he reached his car, Mrs. Rodriguez approached with her granddaughter, both of them looking at him not with anger, but with something that looked almost like compassion. The old woman spoke softly in accented English, asking if he was all right, if he needed somewhere to sit down after what they had all witnessed together. Marcus's phone rang as he sat in his car outside the town limits, his hands still trembling from what he could not explain. His sister Linda's voice was strained when he answered, telling him that their mother had taken a turn for the worse. The routine surgery had revealed complications, and the doctors were now talking about emergency procedures and uncertain outcomes. He drove through the night in silence, trying to focus on the road instead of the image of tears streaming down carved wood. By the time he reached the hospital, his mother was already in intensive care, machines beeping around her bed while Linda paced the hallway with red eyes. The next 3 days blurred together in a haze of medical consultations and sleepless nights in uncomfortable chairs. Marcus found himself checking his phone obsessively, watching his videos of the weeping statue spread across social media with millions of views and thousands of comments from people claiming their own miracles. His mother's condition continued to deteriorate despite the doctor's best efforts. The same hands that had held the burning Bible now held her frail fingers, and Marcus discovered that all his anger against religion meant nothing when faced with the possibility of losing the person who had raised him. Linda finally broke down completely on the 4th day, sobbing in the hospital chapel while Marcus stood helplessly in the doorway, unable to enter the sacred space but unwilling to abandon his sister in her desperate need for comfort. The doctors delivered the news on Friday morning with carefully neutral expressions. His mother's organs were failing, and they had exhausted their medical options. Linda collapsed into a chair while Marcus stared at the white wall, refusing to accept what he was hearing from people he had trusted to save the woman who meant everything to them. His co-workers from the university began calling, offering support, and asking about his extended absence from his philosophy classes. Marcus had built his entire career on rational thought and logical arguments against supernatural beliefs, but none of his academic training provided answers for watching his mother slip away, despite the best that modern medicine could offer. The hospital chaplain approached them gently, a kind woman who had seen countless families face impossible situations. She offered to pray with them, to provide whatever comfort faith might bring in their darkest hour. But Marcus turned away from her outstretched hand with bitter words about false hope and empty promises. Linda stopped speaking to him after that, choosing instead to spend her time in the chapel while Marcus paced the corridors alone. The videos from the procession continued trending online, with news outlets picking up the story and experts debating possible explanations for the unexplained phenomena that hundreds of people had witnessed. Marcus watched the footage on his phone during sleepless nights, staring at his own face in the crowd as tears streamed down wood that should not have been able to cry. Marcus found himself standing outside the hospital chapel at 3 a.m, watching his sister kneel before a simple wooden cross with her shoulders shaking from exhaustion and grief. The doctors had given their mother hours, maybe less, and Linda had not left this small sacred space since the final prognosis. He stepped inside for the first time in 30 years, his footsteps echoing on the polished floor as he approached the pew where his sister sat broken and alone. The words came out as barely a whisper, an apology for his anger and his pride when she needed him most during the worst moment of their lives. Linda looked up with tears streaming down her face, reaching for his hand without hesitation despite everything he had said about her faith and her desperate prayers. She asked him to stay with her, to sit beside her in this quiet place while their mother fought her final battle in the room down the hall. Marcus sat down heavily, staring at the cross while memories flooded back of childhood Sundays when his mother had dressed him in his best clothes for church services he had later rejected with intellectual superiority. The silence stretched between them, filled only with Linda's quiet sobs and the distant sounds of medical equipment keeping their mother alive. A soft knock at the chapel door interrupted their vigil. Mrs. Rodriguez stood in the doorway with her granddaughter, both holding small candles and wearing expressions of gentle concern as they asked permission to pray alongside the family that was facing such heartbreak. Mrs. Rodriguez entered the chapel quietly, her granddaughter Sophia following behind with wide eyes that held no judgment despite recognizing the man who had burned the holy book. The elderly woman placed her candle on the altar and knelt beside Linda, whispering prayers in Spanish, while Sophia sat next to Marcus with innocent curiosity. More people arrived throughout the early morning hours. Father Miguel appeared with coffee and sandwiches, explaining gently that word had spread through the community about the family facing such pain. The same people who had watched Marcus desecrate their sacred text now surrounded him with quiet support and genuine care. Marcus accepted their presence with growing wonder, unable to understand why these strangers would spend their night in a hospital chapel for someone who had deliberately hurt them. Sophia shared her coloring book with him, pointing to pictures of angels and asking if he thought his mother could see them from her hospital bed. When the sunrise finally broke through the stained glass windows, Marcus found himself speaking to Mrs. Rodriguez about the procession, about what he had witnessed that defied every rational explanation he had constructed throughout his academic career. She listened without defending or arguing, simply nodding with the wisdom of someone who had seen many unexplainable things. The nurse appeared in the doorway just after 7, her expression cautiously hopeful as she announced that his mother had stabilized overnight. The machines showed improvement that the medical team could not explain, vital signs strengthening after hours of steady decline toward what had seemed inevitable. Marcus sat beside his mother's bed as she opened her eyes for the first time in days, her voice weak but clear as she asked about the people filling the hospital corridors. The doctor spoke in hushed tones about unprecedented recovery, using words like miraculous and unexplainable while reviewing test results that showed organs functioning normally again. Father Miguel visited that afternoon, bringing with him a small wooden cross that had been carved by someone in the community. He placed it gently on the bedside table, explaining that it was a gift from people who wanted Marcus to know he was not alone in his confusion and searching. Linda squeezed his hand as their mother drifted back into peaceful sleep, whispering that she had been praying for both of them throughout this terrible week. Marcus found himself admitting that he no longer knew what to believe about prayer or miracles or the tears he had witnessed streaming down carved wood. The evening news played silently on the television screen, showing footage of the weeping statue that had been examined by scientists and theologians without reaching any consensus about what had occurred. Marcus watched his own face in the crowd, remembering the moment when flames had vanished from his hands without explanation. Mrs. Rodriguez returned with Sophia, both carrying flowers picked from their garden and stories about other people in the community who wanted to visit when the family felt ready. Marcus realized that his carefully constructed worldview had crumbled completely, leaving him open to possibilities he had spent decades rejecting with academic pride. Marcus returned to the small town 3 weeks later, carrying flowers and a heavy heart as he walked down Main Street toward the church where Father Miguel was preparing for evening mass. The priest welcomed him without surprise, as if he had been expecting this visit since the night when everything changed. Standing before the congregation that had witnessed his destructive anger, Marcus struggled to find words adequate for the harm he had caused to their sacred celebration. His voice broke as he apologized for burning their holy book, for disrupting their procession, for bringing violence into a moment that should have been filled with peace and reverence. The community responded not with the judgment he deserved, but with embraces and forgiveness that left him weeping openly. Mrs. Rodriguez stood up from her pew, telling everyone how this man had sat with strangers in a hospital chapel, how he had accepted their prayers when his own mother was dying. Father Miguel invited Marcus to help with the upcoming restoration of the church sanctuary, explaining that many hands would be needed to repair damage from recent storms and to prepare for the anniversary celebration of their miraculous procession. Marcus accepted immediately, eager for any opportunity to make amends through meaningful work. Sophia tugged at his sleeve after the service, asking if he would help her paint new flowers around the base of the Virgin Mary statue. Marcus knelt beside the little girl, looking up at the carved face that had wept real tears, and promised he would do whatever was needed to honor what he had almost destroyed. Marcus arrived at the church every morning before sunrise, working alongside community members to restore the sanctuary that would host the anniversary celebration of the miraculous procession. His philosophy professor hands, soft from years of academic work, grew callous from sanding pews and painting walls under the patient guidance of men who had built and repaired things their entire lives. The restoration project brought together 3 generations of families, with children like Sophia painting flowers while their grandparents shared stories of previous miracles witnessed in this sacred space. Marcus found himself listening to accounts of answered prayers, unexplained healings, and moments when ordinary people had encountered the extraordinary. Mrs. Rodriguez taught him to prepare the traditional foods that would be served during the anniversary festival, explaining each recipe as a form of prayer passed down through generations. Her kitchen became a gathering place where Marcus learned not just cooking techniques, but also the deep connections between faith, family, and community service. Father Miguel assigned Marcus the special task of researching and writing the history of miracles associated with their Virgin Mary statue, a project that required him to interview elderly parishioners and document their testimonies. The academic in him appreciated the scholarly work, but now he approached these stories with reverence rather than skepticism. The damaged wooden altar took shape under their collective efforts, its restoration serving as a symbol of healing that extended far beyond the physical repairs. Marcus understood that he too was being rebuilt through these acts of service, his cynicism replaced by wonder at the grace surrounding him. Reporter Sarah Martinez returned to cover the anniversary celebration, bringing with her a documentary crew interested in following up on the viral video that had captivated millions of viewers worldwide. She found Marcus painting the final details on the restored altar, his transformation from angry protester to devoted volunteer, creating a compelling narrative for her story. During their interview, Marcus spoke openly about his journey from academic skepticism to witnessing unexplainable events that had shattered his carefully constructed worldview. Sarah listened with growing amazement as he described his mother's miraculous recovery and the community's response to his destructive actions with forgiveness rather than condemnation. The anniversary procession drew thousands of visitors from across the country, all hoping to witness another miracle or simply to experience the peace that seemed to radiate from this small community. Marcus walked beside the Virgin Mary statue as one of the honored carriers, his presence welcomed by people who had seen him burn their holy book just months before. Sophia ran alongside the procession with her friends, pointing excitedly to the flowers she and Marcus had painted together around the base of the statue. Mrs. Rodriguez beamed with pride as she watched the man she had comforted in a hospital chapel, now serving as a bridge between skeptical visitors and the faith community that had embraced him. When Sarah asked about his plans for the future, Marcus explained his intention to establish a ministry for people struggling with doubt and anger toward religion, using his own transformation as testament to the possibility of grace reaching even the most resistant hearts. Marcus stood before his university classroom 6 months later, no longer teaching philosophy as an exercise in intellectual superiority, but as an exploration of life's deepest mysteries. His students listened with rapt attention as he described the difference between academic knowledge and lived experience, between theoretical understanding and encounters that transform the human heart. His mother visited the small town regularly now, her miraculous recovery serving as ongoing testimony to the power of prayer and community support during impossible circumstances. She had formed a deep friendship with Mrs. Rodriguez, two women from different backgrounds united by their shared witness to grace working through ordinary people. The ministry Marcus had established drew seekers from universities across the region, professors and students alike who struggled with reconciling intellectual pursuits and spiritual longings. Father Miguel provided space in the church for these gatherings, where former skeptics shared their stories of transformation and discovery. Sophia had grown taller and more confident, proudly serving as tour guide for visitors who wanted to hear about the weeping statue and the angry man who had become her friend. Her innocent faith continued to challenge Marcus, reminding him that some truths are understood by the heart before the mind can accept them. The documentary about their community had won awards and touched countless lives, but Marcus knew the real miracle was not captured on film. It lived in the daily choice to serve others, to remain open to mystery, and to trust in grace that exceeded human understanding. Have you ever witnessed grace transform someone who seemed beyond hope? Share your story of redemption in the comments below.